Hello, I will talk today about complex adaptive systems, the noosphere, and artificial intelligence. I'm Tomas Veloz from the Mathematics Department of Universidad Tecnológica Metropolitana, Centro Leo Apostel, and Fundación Dicta. I will start with this reflection about the three transformations spoke Zarathrustra. He referred to the human spirit and defined three stages of development. The first is the camel, which is individual obediently accepting social norms, and the lion, who rebels against the constraints and values imposed by society, who were like the values of the time, trying to escape from the ideas of religion and try to develop science, and the child, who is like the third stage of development, where the individual creates its own values and lives free from external impositions. So this was related to the human spirit, but I will establish a bridge between these three transformations and the third story of the noosphere, which will be the child story, and actually advance ideas from complex adaptive systems, especially from artificial life, for the scientific realization of this third child paradigm. So first thing to say is that we are now in the lion era, and that the concept of emergence is actually very problematic for our understanding, current understanding of science. Actually, in our dominant paradigm now, we assume that goals are optimization processes. So if you look, for example, to evolution, it's the optimization of species fitness. If you look to economics, expected utility, metabolism in systems biology, biomass production, and in artificial intelligence, the goal is optimized responses. So correctness. And that's why you get training, and that's why you need data, and so on and so forth. So basically, the paradigm says that whatever we want to think of a goal will be described in terms of this setting. So there are two problematic assumptions here. The first is that there is no significant room, or no room for significant qualitative novelty, because we want to optimize. That means we are going to be in a sort of ultimately fixed phase space. So we need to find the trajectory to get to the minimum of this known in advance fitness landscape. And also the very idea that goals are regions ontologically, they are regions in the phase space, and actually usually reachable in terms of unidimensional dynamics, as it is shown in this setting. It's also problematic because not always we want to go to the specific, through a specific trajectory for a specific point. So there are various examples I will elaborate here explaining that. One of the clear examples is the wicked problems and the noosphere. The wicked problems are like the sustainable goals, for example. So we started the noosphere story. We started from the geosphere, and then we get the biosphere. That led to sort of human evolution, that we started manipulating the earth, creating the money system, and then we get wars, and then we get the Moore's law and the development of computers. Now we got super nice chats and so on, ChatGPT, and we know that there is a route for a pathway to have sustainable development and understand and get a more harmonic relationship with nature, now that we went through all this evolutionary process. So how to reach that balance? It's complicated from the traditional optimization paradigm, because the world, in our complex world, we constantly bring in emergent novelties that they can be technological, they can be social, they can be linguistic, cultural, political, and so on. So the landscape in which we take decisions is actually so dynamic at the qualitative level that either centralized planning or trying to optimize something doesn't look really like the right approach. So this is why we want to go from a scientific understanding of complex systems, but we want to go back and look at what Mother Nature has told us about it already. What do we know about it? So to do this, I will briefly first introduce the idea of complex adaptive systems, which is like the scientific theory of the kind of things we want to look at. So complex systems in particular are many entities of possible different nature, interacting in many different ways. When both entities and interactions can evolve qualitatively and quantitatively over time, we will call them adaptive, because the system is not just evolving and in the entities in terms of the interactions, but the interactions and the kinds of entities are also changing over time. That's why it's like what I was just describing. The salient features of complex adaptive systems, theoretically speaking, these are four. There are many more, but I try to keep to four just to keep it simple. The first is contextuality. That means that there are non-trivial dependencies on the interactions. So interactions are not always all the time, they don't go the same way all the time. They depend on the circumstances. That brings complexity. If you only have non-contextual interactions in physics, they still have complexity, like Ising systems and automatons in general. But in our case, interactions are generally contextual. There is more than just the entities to define the interaction. The environment plays a role, time, temperature, and so on. Feedback is the second feature. And in feedback, we get that output of interactions then is feedback as input for the interactions. It can be directly or indirectly, but systems have these feedback structures. And then what implies the feedback is that you get regulation, because there are these mechanisms of negative feedback, for example, that having more of something will give you less of something. Positive feedback, having more of something will give you more of that same something. So then we can call it regulation in a general sense, that things will tend to regularize somehow, either by stabilizing or by growing indefinitely. But there will be a stabilization or not regularization, not regulation in the sense that always converge, but that become regular. The fact that there is feedback later on and there is regularization implies this idea of self-organization. So the parts of the system that have different feedbacks in between and they are interconnected, they tend to co-regularize themselves. So they end up creating a sort of regular structure, and that's what we understand as a stable whole. And the stable wholes are called emergent in this theory, because they start acting not anymore as parts that are co-regulating, but as an emergent larger structure that is composed out of these entities, but still has its own identity, and even from the point of view of us as observers, it has autonomy. So, and what we get, the effect of the emergence is that emergent structures then form a new complex adaptive system. They create their own interactions at the emergent level, and they have all this process all over again, and there is another level of emergence. So we got hierarchies of complex adaptive systems at the level of different emergent levels. And this we see, for example, in our own body, in our own organisms, and biological organisms in general have like many layers of emergence from cells, tissues, organs, and organisms, and the societies, and then Gaia. So this is the conceptual landscape of how things occur in a complex system. So in order to fix ideas and also to pass quickly by the ways in which these things are represented mathematically, I will take the case of ecosystems. So, and there are many tools to model these kind of systems. The first is, for example, dynamical models. In a dynamical model, we get the species and then dynamical equations that describe how they will interact over time. But there is a big problem with this, that they can only be analytically solved for small cases. If you take many species, then it becomes really hard to solve. Numerical simulations are fine, we can run them, but actually what we care about is the situations when new rules and new entities come into play. And that's the case we care about. And unfortunately, when we have this kind of case, we have to change the equations over time. And that's really hard to do. And there are no analytical methods, and the framework doesn't really work pretty well to handle this kind of situations. In fixed contexts, where there is no novelty at the qualitative level, the dynamical equations work, and the simulations if it's complex, but the case I'm saying is not really useful from this modeling perspective. That's why in the 70s, more or less, the idea of modeling ecosystems with networks became super popular. So then we create links that describe the topology of interactions. In this case, for example, is the food web, predatory interaction. So what is eating what? And we can see that there is an interesting structure showing the interactions between species. And we can study, we can bring new species in and then create arrows to describe these changes, this novelty. But the big problem of networks is that they only encompass one interaction at a time. So we can introduce other types of interactions by introducing other types of links. But the problem of this is that we can have this is called multi-layered networks, where we have different kinds of interactions and we create networks for each kind of interaction, but then how to interconnect these different types of interactions in the network, and what is the result of the dynamics of the system out of that, whether we can define measures such as resilience or complexity or autonomy, or like the kind of elements that we look for when we think of complex adaptive systems. It becomes really theoretically complicated, and there are too many decisions to make for each case. So there is not this is not a principled language to speak of these cases where many interactions are at play. It works for many species, but only one type of interaction, analytically sound. And then if you want to work further for more interactions and potentially novel interactions all the time, this is really hard to handle for this language. So this is why the agent-based models were developed further, and you can have a very, very complete description of the system by means of rules. Rules can evolve even themselves, they can change, and so on. So we get really like all the control for modeling a complex adaptive system. But the problem is that agent-based models heavily rely on simulations. There is not a theoretical framework to describe complex adaptive systemic concepts in the framework of agent-based models. So you can only play simulations, lots of them, and then get interesting results. And that's what people do in socio-ecological modeling, in ecology, and so on. But this is not what we want, because we want to still grasp and grab conceptually the phenomenon of complex adaptive system, not just to model it. We want to grab it conceptually as well. So if I make a little summary of this, these are kind of typical notions that we consider concepts that are relevant when we think in terms of complex adaptive systems. And we see that there are many problems. Like, for example, in the literature, we encounter debates because people don't know how to relate these notions, especially complexity and stability. This is a topic that has been for ages, and it's in many literatures, actually, in ecology or in finance or in sociology or in other fields as well. The relationship between being complex and maintain yourself, be stable or resilient enough, it's not well understood. And actually, to me, the major problem here is that the idea of emergence is not well introduced in either of these models. So particularly for what we care about today, wicked problems of the world, they resist this traditional understanding of goals as an optimization problem, as I was saying, because there is qualitative novelty coming all the time. And sometimes this qualitative novelty is so significant that reshape the entire game of how things work. For example, we can think of that the universe started from the Big Bang, so we only have matter and fields. And at some point, the geosphere, which was just matter and fields playing around, started the process of life. So life then is not anymore the mere happening of physical processes. There is something there that we tend to call purpose, and that's like the problem of the origins of life that, of course, I will not discuss further today. But then we get another emergent level from life. We get consciousness. And then from consciousness, we get language, and so on. So, and then we get societies. So the thing is that there are these major transitions in evolution that the emergence produces new rules, new forms of interaction at a very deep qualitative level. Another big example is the evolution of eukaryote cells. that started from endosymbiosis. So the point is that these qualitatively novel transitions, deep qualitatively novel transitions, do not respond to any optimization paradigm. It's something that changes radically the landscape. So what was being optimized before is not anymore even relevant. So I think that's the big problem, and that's why I want to propose an alternative paradigm, which is a paradigm more aligned to the study of artificial life. It's the paradigm of autopoiesis, which was introduced by Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, and it refers to the idea that living systems have this self-maintaining nature before anything else. So this is like the big idea, the big connection. Autopoiesis means creation, self-creation or self-production, and the key principles are the system creates its own boundary. Within this boundary, the system is able to self-produce, and it also that creates the notion of autonomy between this closed self-producing system and its environment. The separation is created by this process of identifying or by establishing autopoiesis. This typical description shows how autopoietic systems evolve. So the circle represents the autopoietic system, and then the arrows represent the interaction with the environment. But as time goes, the autopoietic systems will have to structurally adapt with the environment, and they will also intervene and alter the environment so that they can also shape the environment, but by shaping the environment, they also shape themselves. So there is something called structural coupling, which is this evolutionary thinking, or is this way of thinking about evolution, where species are actively changing and actively modifying their environment within the evolutionary process. So this is completely different to the survival of the fittest. I mean, it's way more complex than that, because there is feedbacks between what happens in the environment and what happens to the species. It's not just simply adaptation to an environment. There is also the chance to change the environment. So this is a little bit more complicated. And I think that I propose that this is a very good starting point to start thinking in the third story paradigm. So because autopoietic systems are emergent by default, so the very object of study that we care about in complex adaptive systems should be emergent. It should be emergent, that the object of study, not just a property. And that's a little bit of the claim I want to bring. They embody the notion of purpose by through their own existence, because their purpose of an autopoietic system is to dynamically remain being. So that's what brings homeostasis and all these notions that secure existence. And then purpose, it's already embedded in the very form of existence. There is a lot of research that can be done and has been done about the cognitive aspects of autopoietic systems. And this is all research that is, I will have to elaborate a lot to explain, but there is a way to connect this to the foundations of cognition as well. And the evolution, as I said, is through a structural adaptation. So I would just briefly show that we got this kind of modeling. We do these kind of things, and with Professor Heiligen, we did a little bit of research on that for the last years. So basically, we use the language of reaction networks to represent this type of things. What we do is we start with a reaction network, and then we identify for this reaction network, which has all the possible transformations, we identify the subsystems that are able to be autopoietic. These are called chemical organizations. This is theory. I won't tell much about it, but there can be many of them. And actually, the different forms of autopoiesis are of different complexity, of different size. They have different number of reactions and species, and they can contain each other. So an organization, an autopoietic system, can contain other autopoietic systems. So what we actually have is a hierarchy of autopoietic systems out of any universe of transformations, which we call the reaction network. And in this plot, we can see a typical dynamical structural evolution, where we start from a given organization. For example, the point here, that receives a perturbation, many, for example, new entities coming into play, the system evolves and become a new autopoietic structure that then after perturbation goes to a new, and we actually study the structural evolution of autopoietic systems, and we learned that actually there is a natural tendency for autopoietic systems to become more complex and remain longer or become more resistant to perturbations as they become more complex. This is technical stuff. I will have to skip the details here, but there is a sort of relationship between complexity and resilience. And why is that, which is our hypothesis, is that the increase of resilience is on its ability to develop and maintain life. The example, for example, that Terence Deacon was mentioning about the emergence of eukaryote cells is fantastic, because there was this merge between two organizations. They created this endosymbiont, which was like the first form of a eukaryote cell, and that allowed for a lot of novel variety, creating new forms of life in the case of plants or animals, that was completely unprecedented and unexpected to exist before these two organizations merged and emerged into something new, something like at a higher level of complexity. So the resilience and the complexity are interrelated through this in our hypothesis. So to finish with this discussion, I will say that we are starting the lion era of AI now. So we just wanted to remind that, because systems are becoming able to improve based on their feedback they have from us. They are not anymore like purely, completely human design systems. We give them some freedom. The algorithms that they use to self-adapt their weights in the neural network are their freedom, and they can actually operate in ways we don't even know. But it's important to remember that they are still doomed to obey their objective functions. So AI doesn't have intrinsic purpose on its own. We put the purpose in it, saying this is your objective function. So the systems don't have yet the ability to create their own objective functions or attach or detach from them, as we do. That's why we have purpose and values, and or that's why we think we have purpose and values, and systems like that don't. So what I think is that we have to think in the future of AI, the third story AI, let's say, as the child. So the child will be able to self-improve, not just in a specific objective function or in a feedback driven with data like a reinforced learning, but also in creative and playful ways. This is not clear yet, but what we think is that it will have to define, evaluate, and adapt its own goals, and also find ways to detach and attach to these goals in an autonomous way, like playing. So that's why I think that developing AI systems that can learn to experiment with their environment rather than just performing well, it's probably a very good step forward. And that's what I believe that would be the good idea to incorporate AI into the third story, and also thinking of a noospheric AI. Thank you.